If you work in software right now, you're probably running local agents on your machine, Claude Code, maybe multiple sessions in parallel. And like a lot of people, you might be asking, is this the future of software development or is there something more? So companies like Stripe, Ramp, and Harvey are already finding out. So they're experimenting with what happens when you move that loop to the cloud, when agents aren't directly tied to your machine, but become durable, shareable objects that an entire team can collaborate around. And that's what today's conversation is about. So, Harvey builds AI for legal and was founded in 2022 only and has grown into one of the fastest moving companies in enterprise AI. They're now Series G, valued at $11 billion with over 100,000 lawyers on the platform, over 60 countries. So they have a team of around 8 to 900 people, with around 10% former lawyers embedded directly into their product and customer success teams. So my guest today is Joey Wang, engineering lead of Spectre, Harvey's internal collaborative cloud agent platform. So Joey has spent his career at the frontier of product engineering, Google, Uber, 4 years at Figma, doing mobile engineering before joining Harvey as a founding engineer. Joey, really glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
For folks who are watching who maybe aren't as familiar with Harvey, could you tell us a little bit about, what Harvey does, who you serve?
So Harvey is basically like a legal AI platform that we are serving lawyers. And like it can be lawyers from big law firm, can also be lawyers from in-house team, from like corporate. We are a global company. We serve like lawyers across the world that like it's not just like English speaking companies and regional data processing and like different like foundational model company we are serving across the board. The main product is on the web, but because legal workflow may happen in so many different software like Word, Microsoft, like Outlook, people checking email, people like reviewing NDA. And we're also having like mobile apps where people can like use it on phone, scan documents. So all kinds of like legal workflow like that we want to support. We're like try to use AI agents to help them.
Obviously, your engineers are very technical, but you're also sort of staffed with a number of these legal professionals. And I would love to get a sense of what a sort of day in the life is like for an engineer at Harvey.
So there are like lawyers working with AI researcher to figure out how to prompt engineering, how to like eval on like how we do RAG, do we do agentic search. And like we also have internal lawyers who are actually doing, contract review and like a negotiation to do like writing all the like NDA as well. So they are actually our own users, like who are using Harvey to do the legal stuff. So they give a lot of feedback to us. And we have product manager, like there are traditional product manager, but there's also like lawyer turned into product manager who understand users deeply. Sometimes engineer or maybe designer went too far, like try to make really crazy ideas or maybe like really fancy, like, AI agents that like our like legal minded product manager will say like, no, let's hold off on that. Let's make sure like we can adapt our users into like a world that's like they understand how AI works before they can commit all the workload to AI. Then we are running internal testing. Then we are going to like really beta testing with customer. So I would say like, yeah, legal professions like in this vertical are very important to guide how we are building together. And engineers are like kind of building platform, building like that infrastructure that our lawyers can actually jump in and try to like do the prompt change, can do some like product tweak and to fit the real use case and try to like present that to the customer.
The sort of the wider industry right now is kind of in this local agent phase, like I said at the start, maximizing sort of Claude Code running in parallel. And Harvey's almost now moved ahead of that, and you've invested now in cloud-based background agent. Did Spectre kind of start out as a local agent? Was Harvey using sort of local agents and hit a wall? What kind of gave you that conviction that that Spectre and running these agents in the cloud was the right direction to go in?
So I was actually like early, like adopter of Codex last summer, like when Codex just came out. That like you transition from your local IDE like Cursor, at the time like maybe Cloud Code also just like came out, and Codex just like how like very different than like other coding agent that like you just trust the coding agent, you give a prompt, you expect it to output some code that like works, right? And so it actually like unlocks a lot of potential of like early iteration, early ideation that if you don't trust one answer from one task run, you probably can just like prompt 10 times, maybe like slightly different prompts, or you can use Codex multiple version feature that like you just run one prompt, maybe it generated like 4 different directions. So at the time, like Codex model wasn't like good enough to just like cover all the bases and like give you 10 different results like you always trust and land it. So you still need to do a lot of like human validation, human inspection. So I was trying that workflow a lot, that like I end up like, saving a lot of time, but also I need to make a lot of good judgment to make sure only like, 30%, 50% of the PR or maybe changes are actually like valid go into the production. And in the meantime, I know like the local agent are super powerful. They can connect to MCP. They can access your laptop. Maybe you can like download some markdown file to your local laptop, build your known knowledge source, which it's hard to build like in the cloud agent world. So for me, about like, background agent is not just like you need some way to hand off the task to, but also like change how you work with agents. Like you start thinking higher level. You are not thinking about individual tasks like you trust the agent to do, you have to do it. It's more like you start thinking about like what are different attempts, what are different product idea, what are different like investigation goal, or maybe like, sometimes you just want to understand 5 different concepts. Like you don't need to like just stay in one session to like focus on that. You can just like ask 5 questions and come back later and like learn from that. So that just like unlock a lot of like parallelization, and also like, hand off to the background agent, close your laptop and come back and start like, grabbing the context and validate and see how it goes, right? I just did a weekend prototype on if I can like bring, the sandbox version of Cloud Code and like Codex into like a Cloud Run version that I can also ingest my own MCP, so that I can carry that MCP version of like Cloud Code on the go, that I don't need to like, open my laptop to do like 5 tasks in a row, right? And so that is a good weekend project. And I present the idea to internal like developers. People love the idea. People especially love like, we are not at like, monorepo world, that they want to see if like agent is able to dig into all the different repos and be able to figure out like where to make the code change. So that is kind of like the initial version that we want to put together. It's just like running in the cloud, just like Codex, but like you can run any coding harness that like people love, so they don't need to learn something new. Basically, like from a weekend project to validate internally on the ideation, then I try to get resource from like infra, DevX, and security team to like look at that. Then the rest is just become history.
When you mentioned sort of keeping the harness the same and having sort of elements of the developer experience be the same resonates a lot, because that's probably going to reduce some of the friction from moving to, almost like a different pattern and creating a bit of an additional overhead and, cognitive load in learning a new tool. I was curious as well, actually, how often do you find sort of engineers spending time in their editor, or are they able to do most of this now through sort of just cloud prompting?
We are investing both in like, Spectre, but also like the general like local agents. Like we don't want to just like all in Spectre when, like there's so many coding agent company, foundational model company, they are like spend effort on their local version, and like, or even like the web version or desktop version. So what we do is like whatever effort we want to put together, it's going to benefit all the coding agent, including Spectre. And so we spend time on SKUs. We spend time on like onboard MCP, and we also spend time on like, understanding where the gap is for like, parallelization. And at the time, like people just don't understand what worktree is, so we try to do onboarding for worktree. And in the meantime, all the software also try to make it more UI friendly, that you can like spin up worktree, you can hand back to like the main, like main repo branch. So there's like a lot of effort, but we just try to see if we can use a skill that like you can go using any coding agent and try to do the work tree. And so people start getting like, 2, 3, or even 5 branches of even 5 work trees, so they can start parallelizing. But the question is still like, you don't really know how you can work parallel if you like just close the laptop, that you have context in other software like Slack or maybe GitHub or maybe Linear. And also like when you actually have 5 different tabs somewhere, like if you don't really run dangerous permission allowed, and you still have to like, hit yes for so many times. Running in Sandbox is a really good way for our security team to trust us to do that, but also like allow people to try like 10 different wide ideas and don't need to think about whether they are going to write something in the same folder in their laptop, or maybe try to like wipe out something that like affects like one dev server affect another dev server. So that's where like people see the limits of like local parallelization, and people see the potential of like just spin up a new background agent and be able to like let it run for a really long time and go so many different directions.
How do you see this sort of world of coding agents, background agents, cloud agents, and almost like what you're doing from a product perspective with your legal agents?
I think in software engineering world, like a lot of things live in your laptop. And that's true because you probably like clone some repo, you have some personal document, you download something. But over time, like you start getting to the cloud and you start like, I mean, GitHub is the place that hosts your data, hosts your code, hosts your PR, hosts your information around like PR comments. And maybe Linear is hosting the project management parts. And that is like similar to what legal world is. Like in the past, they do have local documents, and because of like privacy concern and security concern, they start like having the data in the cloud, and they start having like computation in email, which is similar to like a project management perspective. A lot of like law firm doesn't really have like the users download the data into local to run them, and most of data is still in the cloud. So by building Spectre, actually like tells us how much parallelization that a user can do, and how do you imagine the interaction between like a human with agents. But also on the other side, like when one person can run multiple agents, what happened to multiple people running one agent or maybe like running one project? And that is like the problem that law firm try to find a solution for. You have paralegal, you have associate, you have partner, you have like law firm and like their clients. You have in-house team and you have different position inside the company that probably like pass one contract from one lawyer to another. And it's very similar to like how code review or maybe like a PRD, like basically like a product requirement doc passed to engineer, and engineer start writing like engineering requirement doc and pass to like engineer like ICs who might need to like implement that, and go back to like designer to look at the Figma design whether like things are working well, can they validate that. GitHub repo is similar to like a legal case, a legal matter, which means like it's a container of documentation system, memory, skills that like a legal law firm can work with a client on a subject matter, right? And for PR, it's just like kind of generated artifact that human need to review. And we are trying to align that with what potentially can be like a legal artifact. It could be like a table, spreadsheet, or maybe like a Word document, or maybe like the red line. Red line is basically like a diff of a Word document. So very similar to PR is basically like a diff for a code file. And that can help us understand how we can map that concept to legal firm, to their clients, so that they can collaborate really well. So that is kind of like one direction we are looking to, which is basically a high-level concept. How can we map them well? Second is what I mentioned earlier. How do we ingest the content? How do we put the MCP at the right level? And thinking about like what are the privacy concerns are. Like sometimes maybe a security team has some changes, maybe some context they shouldn't let other side of a company see. And similar to this, like legal like the teams in the legal law firm probably having some like ASIC words that one team cannot let other team to see the content. So how do we build that boundary? How do we really think about like sharing permission versus like content like viewing boundary, and how do we make sure like they are never across? And that is like what we can learn from building Spectre better, and infer how we are building like Harvey better.
You mentioned within that like sort of the idea of this being sort of collaborative, which is something that stands out as well within the blog post that you wrote. So probably most people think of these background agents or agents themselves running privately for a single person. You sort of touched on this a little bit earlier on, but Harvey seems to take a different approach with Spectre. So the session itself, you mentioned this, the blog post is almost like the source of truth, with sort of multiple people collaborating inside it. Could you kind of walk us through what that looks like in practice?
I'm from Figma, so I work at Figma during COVID time. That was like a wonderful 4 years. Learned a lot on how to build product, but also like learned a lot on when you have a really sticky product that people can collaborate no matter what role you are. Designers going to design something, PM is going to understand or give the products back, and engineers going to preview what they are going to build and give the context, give the feedback to that. So what I'm seeing is everyone's using their own coding agent locally really effectively to solve their own problem. But when they present the result to other people, people always have to ask the question like, did you think about that? Did you test that? And what is your architecture plan? And what is your plan with Cloud Code cursor like that you already approved for, right? So people want to know the context when they see the results, and it's really hard to share that context. The better context you are giving to other people, it's similar to like the better context you give to agent, the better like result is going to be, and also like the better alignment people are going to have together. It's basically like, a lot of times people are like, oh, we need to collaborate in a thread, then finally hand off that task to agent, and agent will wrap up and give us some PRs, and we have to discuss that PR either in a meeting or maybe in GitHub directly, or like chat in person and try to land it. But my idea is like, if you already have all the contacts in the same thread of a Slack channel, and you should just be able to give all the agents, give the context to the agent. Agent is able to make the decision based on all your agreement. Then everyone's already like aligning on the direction, and the end result should be approved really quickly. So this is what collaborative means for Spectre. So some real example here. So in this case, we have our Adrian is our AR, basically applied legal researcher, and he's looking into some query field, and this is kind of like a task link that we are doing. And David is actually our lawyer turned into product manager, and very easily he just asked Spectre, why did the query fail? And Billy is our engineer, and engineer find out the data doc link to indicate why it failed. But in the meantime, Spectre validate the idea is the same because we have hard-coded max turn 80 for how many turns people are using. So it turns out we do have a lot of users talking to Harvey agent for 80 turns, and we do have some limit in the past, but I don't know if we are showing that limit directly to the customer, whether this just fail silently. So we have other engineer jumping to look at lensmith trace, which is MCP that we support. So we can look into the data behind the stuff to see if the tool execution actually works, or maybe there's other improvement that we can do. And because this is a thread that David starts, so David has all the context around why we need to make the work. And when engineer actually have the question, it doesn't really automatically insert that into the original query. So it needs some added access from David. And we just make it very easy that David just need to react. And the access granted to the engineer and follow-up happens. Then the rest is just become discussion between human and agent. And we land on the solution directly on let's turning on a better or more limit. So this is where agents helping on the investigation approach, looking at the data, and the whole team just align on the direction. So that's one example. And similarly, how we are building Spectre, improving Spectre by add Spectre. So I just find out some GitHub action just didn't really work. So it's able to try to find CI logs and give me some suggestion maybe some prevention, some future approach to notify us on the failure. And I just literally have deployed Spectre to dev, which actually it is using my personal memory, understanding when you deploy to dev. That means I need to comment something on the PR instead of making some Python code to do the deploy. Because memory matters a lot when you are talking to agents. So Spectre also remembers my memory. And other people, when they say deploy, maybe they meant other deployments, so it's not doing the same thing. Then when Bob look at the results, and Bob has some context, this is the agent, kind of agent results. And Bob just say this seems wrong. And I just ask Spectre, hey, can you check Bob's comments? And because Bob has some context that maybe agent or me just didn't have in the past. So upon that checking, agent realized it's actually correct based on what every context happens. And Bob now realized okay, we might have another problem, which is the CI coverage for Spectre deployment, CI check. So I also grant the access to Bob, and Bob is able to make another PR that like consolidate all the context we had in the past from the log, from CI, from conversation I had with Bob, and end up like having a PR. And another context 30 minutes ago, it's like we're not using this one anymore, and we try to like make a different build kite change. So that's where like when you have some initial discovery, when you have initial like kind of context, how does like different context coming from human, from logs, from like my memory actually make the whole session really cohesive and actually deliver the result that all the parties will align to.
In the blog post, Joe, you talk about sort of a session almost being like a durable sort of object that kind of carries through. In what we saw there, is the session like the Slack thread, or there is sort of a separate kind of session? How do you deal with sort of multiple people kind of collaborating in a single session?
We always start from simple, right? You don't want to start with like really complex concepts. So what we started in the beginning was just like single user, single task, multi-turn. And we like basically I dig into how Cloud Code and Codex were persisting their sessions. And like for Codex, it's basically like a session ID based, and they store a lot of like session context in the cloud. And for Cloud Code, it's very like local first. So they store like session as a JSON-L file that you can basically like store in blob storage. So when we are talking about like a durable session, it means like we need to really figure out like where to store that session, where the data live, and how can we make sure we have the data privacy like protection on that. And that's where like we kind of like can continue on the session. So that's the first step. Then the second step is like when multiple people can share one thread, what is the permission model? Where's the data sharing model? And the easiest way to start is just like making all the public data accessible in a thread. So everyone's kind of like a reader, but also like when they are doing the editing, they are basically like mutating also like kind of the public data. So PR is a great way to think about that. Like if we map all the users who have GitHub access, then that makes like much easier to like just Spectre user have the exact same access of what Git PR access or maybe Git repo access is. And every data is just become public data. So you start from there, like your Slack, your Notion, your Google Doc, everything is starting from public. That you just encourage people to collaborate first, and all the information are not something that like agent can see, a human can see that other human cannot really see. And then like it's become like a debate of should we make edit access by default or should we make it more like opt-in. And there's some discussion on that, and I think it's just by like trying out that like maybe the voice of making like edit access by default is less than the people who just want to like keep it like edit access for the owner first and start granting like as separate concept. Because at the end of the day, like people still have the most knowledge when they start a query, and they can selectively choose what other context that they want the agent to include, so that like maybe an agent is running in one direction, you don't want it to like go to another direction, then you can like totally start another Slack channel or Slack thread with the same group of people and have that same thread like fork to another conversation with a different like agent run. So next step might be like how can we start enrolling like per user OAuth data, and how do we only share the data that like with the people who already can see the data. That requires more conversation, more design thinking, more security, privacy, like system design. So that's where like with great power you have great responsibility, and that's where like I'm heading to, which is just like how can we bring more data into platform, but also in the meantime like make sure like people understand what they can see, what they cannot see.
Yes, and like you mentioned earlier on, I'm sure that also matters quite a lot in the legal context as well, to solve the sort of permissions issue of accessing different bits of context and data
Yeah.
in that parallel as well. In the blog post, you mentioned something actually that stood out to me, which is you said about scheduled work, and actually in the UI, it was there actually on the side, on the left hand side, you got this sort of automations. You sort of mentioned that it sort of surprised you that it had more utility than you anticipated. And could you speak to what that sort of schedule type of agent kind of unlocked for your teams?
In the past, schedule really just means like if you repeatedly doing some work, you wanted to like do it again, that you don't want to like re-enter the same prompt, or maybe you don't want to remember you have to enter that like at the time that you need to do it. And what makes interesting is like, now like Spectre can send Slack posts because we set up everything really well. Now, like Slack can be a like kind of notification platform where like you can just like schedule a bunch of like job that the team should be aware. Like you need to like maybe figure out how to hand off on call. You can like totally look into the past on call logs and instant channel messages, and also like GitHub history and linear tickets. So you can literally like do that on call handoff like automatically. You don't need human to do that anymore, right? Let me show one example I really love. I have tons of PR that I need to actually checking. I end up like just asking agent to group my PR into different category, like front and back end only, Spectre Slack app, DB migration, doc only. And I ask it to generate like an interactive dashboard, and it will be able to generate dashboard about like, does the CI fail? Does, like the PR super behind? And like, you can check on different category. You can multi-select. You can generate like a copy of, hey, can I like batch solve the CI issue? Then I can just like copy this agent prompt to another agent session and be able to do a batch action by my own application, right? So you basically like generate apps on the fly, and it's super powerful when you are combining with all the data source. So as I mentioned earlier, like instant, linear, like GitHub, and like Google Page, like Notion. So Spectre become your personal assistant or your team assistant that like have unlimited possibilities. And legal people can actually like look into the user feedback and try to summarize into like what product like prototype can look like, because it reads the code, it reads all the feedback from the user, and that it can start suggesting what the product prototype can be. So it can be like one prototype every day, or it can be like one prototype every 5 minutes if you have AI to validate, because you don't have human to validate like so many prototypes every day. So that's just like the frequency or the power that you can deliver is like unlimited, and I just feel like we unlock a lot of use case that we didn't imagine in the past.
Yeah, that's wild. So you're literally using Spectre to build a dashboard to triage your aspects of Spectre and then scheduling that as well. That's amazing. There's so many layers to it. Joey, thank you so much. I think we're about at time. I did want to give a shout out also to your blog post, right? I mentioned it before, but I think people, if people are interested in what we discussed today, do go and check out the blog post that Joey wrote called Building Spectre that you can find on their website as well. But otherwise, thank you to everyone for watching and joining in along the session for the Background Agent Summit.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting.